What's up, everybody? Welcome to Convo Blueprint. I'm your host, Zion. And today I want to talk to you about um, why is it so expensive and why can Hawaiians not afford to live in Hawaii? I was born here. I live here now. It feels like home. And yeah, I just want to have the conversation about it. At Convo Blueprint, what we like to do is figure out what is the root of a thing, right? So, like, what's at the root of Hawaiians not being able to afford to live in Hawaii? Is it just that it's expensive? Because guess what? Isn't it expensive to live everywhere right about now? Inflation, 40-year high. But as always, before we get started, I have to let you all know what my meditation was today. All right, so here we go. Boom, there it is. Okay, it was in Psalms 119, and I'll just read verse 65 to 72. It says, "Do good to your servant according to your word. Lord, teach me knowledge and good judgment, for I trust your commands. Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I obey your word. You are good, and what you do is good. Teach me your decrees. Though the arrogant have smeared me with lies, I keep your precepts with all my heart. Their hearts are callous and unfeeling, but I delight in your law. It was good for me to be afflicted so that I might learn your decrees. The law from your mouth is more precious to me than thousands of pieces of silver and gold." Now, this is, King David talking here in the writing of the Psalms. The piece, that stood out to me, like the afflicted, it's highlighted here, right? It's in the toughest times of life that we learn the most, we glean the most, and we learn how to believe in ourselves, and we learn how to develop our faith, and we learn how to further believe in the promises of the Most High, or whatever your chosen faith is. It's in those tough moments that we find the power to keep going. So I hope that as things are seeming very tragic in the world today, that you all are enduring, and that you're finding something to keep you having joy, because at the end of the day, life is a blessing, and life is joy. All right. So without further ado, let's get into it. And there's a couple clips I want to share with y'all today that I feel like get to the heart of this problem. Like, why can't Hawaiians afford to live in Hawaii? That's crazy, right? That's crazy. It's crazy. So here we go.
I've never been homeless before. This is my first time. Sometimes I feel no matter how hard you try, there's always a barrier here in Hawaii.
Native Hawaiians are being priced out of Hawaii.
No way could I afford to even live here, just me alone. And that's the sad part of it. We can't afford to be here.
Hawaii is the most expensive state to live in the U.S., and out-of-state buyers continue to turn housing units into vacation rentals or second homes. As tourists flock to the state's resorts, golf courses, and beaches, local residents are facing a housing affordability crisis.
They want $1 million for places. This is Maui. It's not like you can drive to another island.
Rent is also increasing, and salaries are not keeping up with the rising cost of living. Gentrification isn't new, but for Native Hawaiians, being priced out can mean...
And isn't that something? Like, that is literally happening everywhere, right? Our wages are not keeping up with the higher costs of living, and that is a American problem. I'm probably going to do some videos about capitalism versus socialism, and I think one of the I'm not saying I'm for socialism, but I would argue that what we have in America, though they call it capitalism, I think it's capitalism for the people, meaning, like the consumer, but for the very wealthy and the corporation, which, I think it was Ronald Reagan who ruled to say that corporations are people. From that perspective, I believe we are corporate socialists, where all the decisions are made. Every president since, I would say, Bush and maybe before that, but at least going from George Bush, we can see that every president has bailed out these so-called no-fail banks and no-fail corporations. And during COVID, it was the same thing with the airline industry. And so all of our tax dollars are going to wars and corporations, which they say create jobs, but there's about to be a whole bunch of layoffs. I don't know if y'all been looking at what's going on with the economy. That's what's going on.
Mean being forced to move off island entirely, thousands of miles away from their ancestral lands.
This is our land. It was stolen from us in 1893. We're the indigenous peoples that belong here, yet we can't even afford to be here.
This is Maui, homeland of the Kanaka Maoli, who were branded native Hawaiians during colonization. On one side of the island, tens of thousands of tourists are concentrated into condos and high-end hotels. On the other side, Jessica Lau is living in her car, partly because she couldn't afford her rent.
I mean, I have family that offered me to stay with them, but they're on hot housing, and I'm not trying to get anybody to lose their home because of me. Yeah. But I like it here. This is where my mom's scattered.
She uses the facilities at the boat harbor to shower and get ready for work.
My dad got me to be a member here, so I use the restroom here. And if I wanted to use, they have a gas stove in the inside that they say I can use. So I either use their hose, or I bring my hose here.
Jessica worked as a tour bus guide and operator for over 4 years. But long days on jungle roads meant she often couldn't use the bathroom for hours at a time. To prevent more serious bladder and kidney issues, she quit. She now works at a temp agency.
This is what it's like to be unsheltered in Hawaii. So it would be a matter of time. You mean to come up with first month, last month, and deposit. With the pandemic and the pay rate down, right now it's hard. I have to be at work at 5. I get off at 1:30, and then I would go.
To me, like, what do y'all think about this? I think it is crazy that any American citizen can work a 40-hour work week, can have a full-time job, and be homeless. Like, what do y'all think about that? And I think it's crazy because I feel like we're living in a time where people think this is okay and that, oh, everyone should just go to college. Everyone should just, try to get a better job so they can afford to have a living. But we all have the same human needs: food, shelter, water, heat, and AC, in a lot of places right now. But we have like the same needs. And so to me, it's not okay that any American is working a full-time job and yet they cannot afford a roof over their head. And that, to me, I don't think there's any other way I can say that. That's not okay to me. What do you all think? Let me know in the comments.
Jessica ran out of money, so she moved into her car to avoid an eviction on her record. Even without Jessica's obstacles, an average salary in tourism isn't enough to afford rent on a 2-bedroom apartment. So now Jessica parks with a few other unhoused individuals at the harbor. From where she sleeps, she can see where she used to live.
Here, I used to live here. I was paying $14.50 for a 2-bedroom. Then the owner decided to sell, so then I moved to the next building, which the rent came up to $1,600.
Hawaii has one of the highest rates of homelessness in the U.S. While the government sponsors programs like shelters and housing subsidies, relief is often temporary with waitlists up to 5 years. And in general, there just aren't enough permanent affordable housing units. Short-term solutions that exist elsewhere in the States aren't available in Maui.
California, you can stay at a motel and pay $46 a night and not have to be homeless. Here in Maui, they don't have no motels or anything. They only have hotels here.
And those hotels can cost on average $500 per night. The U.S. government took control of the Hawaiian Islands in 1898. The majority of Kanaka Maoli protested the move as illegal. The U.S. never provided them reservation land. But they did sponsor a program called Hawaiian Homelands, which is meant to provide land for them to lease. There's currently a backlog of 28,000 applicants on the waitlist. Many applicants.
28,000 applicants. And I can tell y'all, like, what is happening here in Hawaii is the same thing probably happening in every city or desirable location. A bunch of sky-rise apartments that not many people can afford. And it's only going to lead to a total downturn of the economy at a certain point when people are no longer able to afford these things. it's not sustainable at all. And to me, I don't think it's, fair or right or righteous to steal the land and then not allow the people to be able to live off the land. Like, that doesn't seem legit to me at all.
Like Carolee Kamakona have been waiting for decades.
You'll see this where it lists as of December 2020, the different islands. You can see the Maui wait list here. I went on the wait list in 2002. This is 2021, so 19 years I've been on Maui's wait list.
An average price for a home in Maui hit a record $1.1 million this summer. Carolee would like to buy a home, but without government help, it would be impossible. She now lives with her elderly mother and adult son because none of them can afford rent on their own.
These homes can run about $850 and up to $1 million. Not because of the houses and the way they look, because of the location of the houses. Is that affordable for a Kanaka Maoli? No. Not even if you're working 3 jobs with 2 incomes in the household. So that's why Kanaka Maoli have a lot of multi-generational homes where you have 2, 3, possibly even 4 generations living in one household, just so that we could survive and live here at home. My mom, she's 87. For me, I'm 64, and my son is 30. So 3 of us live here in a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house. No way could I afford to even live here, just me alone. My son, with what he makes in the tourism industry, wouldn't be able to rent a house.
Carolee has 7 children, and none of them are eligible to apply for Hawaiian homelands. Applicants need at least 50% Native Hawaiian blood quantum to qualify.
I have the 50%. My kids don't have 50% because of an interracial marriage. So they're less than 50. So I cannot give it to them. None of my kids.
Even if Carolee's name was called, the lease offered her would only be temporary, with no pathway to actually own the land. The plots can be expensive, with homes on them that can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, which she couldn't afford.
So I have to wait for them to give me a lot. When that happens in my lifetime, you think? Probably not.
And it's just insane to me. While, Mark Zuckerberg can buy up half the island, like, people who are from here, born here, cannot even get what was promised to them. Like, this seems to be like a reoccurring theme, don't it?
This probably means that my kids will never ever get a chance to buy a home here. Because once I die, once my mom dies, there is no more 50% blood quantum for my family. It's genocide. It's a way to get rid of the people.
6 out of 7 of Carolee's children already live on the mainland. But for Carolee, leaving is not an option.
Even my kids ask, Mom, just come already. You guys can live with us. I don't want it. I love my home here.
1 in 3 Kanaka Maoli households is at risk of homelessness. As the government works on long-term solutions, Jessica is still living in her car.
Lori Suhaku, Director of County Department of Housing and Human Concerns, said that some of the unsheltered are employed, but their income is insufficient to afford rent. It is true. Like, I don't have a problem paying rent or working, but to come up with first month and last month and deposit is hard for many of us guys, especially during this pandemic. I make half of what I used to make when I did tours.
Yes, and for even military families moving here, like, when you move here, it's first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposits. So you just, and since rent is so high, right? For a 2-bedroom apartment, I don't even think you can get, when was this? This might have been a couple years ago, but I don't think you can get a 2-bedroom apartment for $1,600. Okay, this is in January. Yeah, like, yeah, I don't know if you can swing that these days. But what I will say, so that's anywhere from 10 grand, right? Let's say an average of 10 grand to be able to move into a place. So something should be done about this. I mean, what do y'all think? Is this okay for Hawaiians, Native Hawaiians, not to be able to afford to buy property? And we're going to go back to the history in a second with another video. But in going back to the history, because a lot of indigenous people don't believe in owning land, like it's a concept that's not natural to them. So we're going to see how that plays out in basically what is going on now.
So anywhere between $13, $14, $15, that's what I'm making now, versus the $24, $52 that I used to make back then.
Jessica also doesn't have any plans to leave. Despite her struggles at her old job, Jessica enjoyed being able to share her love for Maui as a tour guide. She hopes to find a way back to the industry while still protecting her health.
This mountain right here besides us is Haleakala Mountain, but that's the mountain I drove around for 4.5 years, 129 miles, and that's how you get around the island. To go, I look forward to going back to that occupation. In the meantime, I'll just take whatever needs to be taken so I can be able to stay above water and not have to suffer.
Whew. Yes, it's a heavy thing. Like, just to know that we're not really doing anything about the homelessness problem, so it's only going to get worse. And I seen like this is an American problem that we're not doing anything about. And I forget where it was at, but I just saw something about how people are afraid to go out of their house. Let me know if y'all seen it. The viewer watching, let me know if you've seen it. But like, basically, people are afraid to go outside of their houses because of the homeless encampments, tent cities. It's pretty much about to be a tent city everywhere. So let's look at Jake Tran's video, how the U.S. stole Hawaii. This is going to take us back to the reality of how the land was stolen and how it was, how would I say that? Commoditized. I just make up a word. Basically, commercialized for its resource, which is sugar. And it's going to go into, how it all happened from the Christian missionaries.
Coconut palms, coral sand beaches, coconut palms gently swaying in the ocean breeze, waterfalls, rainbows. Hawaii is all these things and many more. In fact, Hawaii has a deep, dark little secret, a secret the U.S. government wouldn't like you to know about.
Have you ever wondered why Hawaii is a part of America? After all, it's 2,000 miles from the American mainland. Native Hawaiian people definitely don't look like Americans in any way, shape, or form, and Native Hawaiians have their own culture, cuisine, and language that is completely different from Western culture. So why is Hawaii a part of America? Well, the answer is it was never supposed to be. Hawaii had its own government, its own laws, its own economy, and the locals had laid claim to the islands for more than 1,000 years. But then came the Americans, the missionaries who wanted to spread the word of God. These missionaries would soon realize just how profitable sugar farming could be on Hawaii. So they encroached ever so slowly on the Native Hawaiians, taking their land, their culture, their dignity, their spirit away from them.
With the reality of history and Christianity and what we know about it and missionaries, I do see how a lot of people are not cool with Christianity, because with the idea that other people need to be saved, there's a dehumanization that has occurred from colonialism, and using the name of God to be your foundation, that you're doing a good thing is kind of, it has been used over and over and over again, even now with things like, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, for Christian people to celebrate that. I think, it's kind of like, that's not even a victory in a way. In a way, it's not a victory, because instead of celebrating the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I feel like it's hypocritical, because these same Christians, in particular evangelicals, would not advocate for the child after the child is born. And I really broke that down on the video I did, Roe v. Wade, on, so check that out on my channel. I really dove deep into the hypocrisy of Christianity celebrating the overturning of Roe v. Wade, but yet not advocating for the child after they're born. Yes, I really went into that.
Inch by inch over the decades, and ever so slowly, these Americans gradually beat the Hawaiians into submission, all the way until Hawaii was officially recognized as the 50th state of the US in 1959. See, to put it bluntly, Hawaii was stolen in every sense of the word. Their land stripped from them, their power stripped from them, their leaders toppled, seized by Americans in the name of chasing the mighty dollar.
The establishment of large sugar plantations was kind of the colonial force that really pulled these islands into the chain.
Colonial force, it was the economic stimulus, whereas the European Christian missionaries could make money off of. It was a way that this land could be commoditized, and that is how, I don't even know if that's a good word, but I like it. I like to make up my own words. I don't know if it's a real one, but that's how my ancestors came to the island of Hawaii. And me and my mom went to visit the plantation, and there was homes. You know, I'm Black, Puerto Rican, Portuguese, and Cherokee. So my Puerto Rican and Portuguese heritage came over here, and they worked the sugar fields and the pineapple fields.
Chains of global capital agricultural production, and left behind the legacy of consolidated land ownership, control over water rights, and really the disenfranchisement and marginalizations of indigenous people and their homelands.
The bottom line, all the way until today, where on the surface, Hawaii looks like a tropical paradise, a top-tier destination any tourist will want to visit. But if you look a little deeper, this island that was once the home to an indigenous population is almost entirely owned by just 82 landholders. We're talking about 95% of Hawaii's land being owned by just 82 landholders by 2015. More than half of that land belongs to a government the people didn't choose, and the rest, it is in the hands of the sugar and pineapple companies that control.
Thinking about that, right? The idea of owning land, not being central to indigenous cultures, owning the land really is the ticket to owning the resources. All of America's wars, all of Britain's colonial efforts was about owning the land and controlling the resources. And you can find a way. You know, it's kind of like land is like a gold mine, right? If you have a particular land, you can go out there and you can find something on that land that can be commercially produced, then to, you know, gain a whole bunch of money. Then there's like land is money in a lot of ways. You can plant, farm, you could create farmland, you could build your own house on your own land, and then most of all, you could pass the land down to your relatives, to your children and your children's children, and that way that will be the economic stimulus for it. You see what I'm saying? So being that indigenous people and the Hawaiian people did not believe in owning land, this was a big thing and a big adjustment, because this is how they were able to be taken over in some ways, because the land was taken from them.
Control the islands. My name is Jake Tran. I make documentaries on money, power, war, and crime in my team. Subscribe for more. If you want to win $1,000 cash, you just have to be following me at Jake Tran and you're automatically entered. A few of you have won already. Watch out for fake accounts. I will never message you asking for money. And this is how the US stole Hawaii. If you're watching this channel right now, you probably want to be really successful one day. And yeah, that's going to take a lot of hard work. But being successful isn't just about always grinding. In fact, most successful people know that 90% of this game is mental. And a big part of becoming successful is working through all the mental issues, childhood trauma, and relationship issues that we're all plagued with, including myself. And the truth is, the best way to deal with all of this is with a therapist. Looking back, I really wish someone would have pushed me to do therapy sooner. I used to be super awkward because of all my insecurities and childhood trauma, and I could have gotten over that way sooner and easier if I had a little help. I would have been happier sooner, I wouldn't have wasted so many years, and I would have been more successful sooner. But the problem is finding a therapist in your area is difficult and expensive. But not anymore, because that's where today's video sponsor BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp is democratizing therapy. They're the largest therapy platform in the world with over 2 million users. It isn't a crisis line or self-help, it's professional therapy all done securely online. With BetterHelp, you'll have access to over 20,000 licensed and vetted therapists all online. And getting started is super easy. Just give BetterHelp a little information about yourself and what kind of therapy you're looking for. Then, based on your needs, BetterHelp matches you with a therapist who is the best fit for you. And boom, that is it. You can start communicating with your therapist in as little as 48 hours, and once you're matched, you can send them a message whenever you want. You can set up weekly video or phone calls with your therapist, so you can avoid the awkwardness of in-person meetings. And if you're not feeling your therapist, it's simple and free to switch to a new one. BetterHelp is more affordable than traditional therapy, and financial aid is available. So take control of your future today by pausing the video and heading over to betterhelp.com/JakeTran for 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/JakeTran for 10% off your first month. Thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video.
Shout out to the sponsors.
More than 1,000 years ago, a group of Polynesian settlers arrived on the Hawaiian Islands. These settlers lived without any real government for 700 years because their cultures never really needed one. And then by 1778, James Cook arrived. He was the first European to ever lay...
Hold up, isn't that crazy? So the way that the culture was, they didn't need a government established. Isn't that interesting? Because many today, because of how we're raised and the culture we're raised in, we think, okay, if there wasn't a government, like how would things operate? But they didn't need a government due to the culture. Very interesting.
Lay foot on the islands. And understandably, the native Hawaiians were pretty freaked out by these people who carried guns and acted like they owned the place. Long story short, Captain Cook and his sailors spent a few weeks on the islands and ended up giving the people dozens of Western diseases that wiped out more than half of the population. Then, on his second visit, Cook was mistaken for a Polynesian god, told his sailors to steal wood from a sacred Hawaiian burial ground, tried to kidnap one of their kings, and got himself killed because of it. Not exactly a great start to Hawaiian-Western relations. But more importantly, Cook's visits had put Hawaii on the map. Even after hearing about the captain's gruesome death, European and American sailors couldn't help themselves. The allure of Hawaii's tropical landscape, natural harbors, and the chance to restock supplies were just too great. So after Captain...
If you have not been to Hawaii, then it is an experience I think everyone should have. It is amazing living in paradise. That's all I say about that.
James Cook's first visit to Hawaii in 1778, the islands would never be the same again. Now it was time for Americans to take their chances on the Hawaiian Islands. But it wasn't just any Americans. They were American missionaries. Way back in the 18th century, most Christians believed it was their God-given duty to travel around the world, teaching the heathens and barbarians, as they like to call them, about the only true religion. And Hawaii was no exception. You see, Polynesian religion was nothing like Christianity. Hawaiians believed in many different gods, and that just made the
And that's where the problem comes in with Christianity. Everyone else is a heathen or a barbarian if they're not a Christian. Like, where did this, I really feel it makes me think that in our modern day, the mark of the beast is going to be ushered in by the church. How do we know that? Well, the scripture says judgment begins in the house of the Most High. So it begins in the house. And I feel like judgment begins in the house because those who are in the house should know better and they should know what is right. So to veer from the truth or try to establish your own truth, you're going against the Most High. Then you are antichrist at that time. You're anti-God. So I think that in our modern day, Isaiah 5:20 says, "Woe to those who call good evil and evil good." And I feel like we are in that time. I personally am pro-life, but what I understand, I think the law should be pro-choice, because what I understand is there is a separation between church and state. And even though one political party is trying to merge the two together, every time we see that happen in scripture, it was never good. Because whose righteousness are we following? right? Even the Most High gives free will. So how can you say you're pro-life and that should be the law that everyone has to follow? And where does it stop at that point? So now Republicans are going after gay marriage, right? I hate the word. I hate the labels. Like, can it just be marriage? They're going after marriage equality. How about I say that? And so at what point do they then go to interracial marriage? Do they then undo all of the progressive? Do we undo Brown versus the Board of Education? And where does this stop? And it's crazy and insane to me. And how this relates to this video is because these are the people who call themselves Christian. Because I was like, how do I connect this all? Like, these are the people who call themselves Christian, who want to govern what you do in your house. My thing is this: whatever your religion is, that's between you and the Most High, you and your God. Malcolm X said his relationship with Islam was between him and Allah. And anybody that was for the betterment of the Negro in America at that time, he would work with them. This is what Malcolm X said. So yeah, it ties in because the people who call themselves Christians are the main ones who trying to be everyone else's God.
Christian missionaries more determined to prove them wrong. The only problem was, these missionaries didn't just want to spread their religion, they wanted to force it onto people. Better yet, they wanted to completely change Hawaiian society to follow Western culture. So, when boatloads of American missionaries arrived...
That is a key element of colonialism. European colonialism, the key element of it over the last few hundred years was about totally eradicating the culture of others and forcing them to assimilate into their culture and religion and everything they believe.
Arrived carrying guns and telling the Hawaiian people that singing, dancing, and games were suddenly illegal. They didn't have much choice but to accept that this was the new normal. Then, in the mid-1800s, the missionaries decided to make an even bigger change. This time, they thought Hawaii would be easier to control if it had one king, instead of many chiefs and elders. One guy that could tell what to do, and the Hawaiian people would just have to nod and agree. So the missionaries installed a puppet king to rule Hawaii, and forever changed the landscape of a power on the island. Whether or not Hawaiian people agreed to this change was irrelevant. But hey, at least the Kingdom of Hawaii, as it was now called, still had its independence, and that was a pretty big deal. You see, by the late 1800s, there were only 44 completely independent countries in the world.
A faux type of independence, right? Not really independent, because if you have a king that's a puppet, then you're not really independent.
And Hawaii was one of them. Today, there are 197. That meant, by 19th century standards, Hawaii was pretty special. It wasn't a colony, it wasn't a territory, it was a kingdom. It didn't have to answer to anyone except its own king. But as you can guess, that wouldn't last long. Being a missionary and preaching the word of God on a tiny group of islands didn't exactly pay well. These American missionaries were dead broke in Hawaii, and that was becoming a problem. Forget laying up their treasures in heaven. They wanted a little more real material benefit from all that good news and gospel they were spreading. But unlike mainland America, Hawaii didn't have any gold, it didn't have any oil, and it didn't have any diamonds. But what Hawaii did have was sugarcane. And that's where the missionaries struck sweet, white, powdery gold. Sugar. By the 1830s, the Industrial Revolution had spread to America, which meant mass production of white sugar was just another incredibly lucrative business. And the missionaries wanted in. So they teamed up with the not-so-religious American farmers and together made a plan to turn Hawaiian land into the most profitable sugar plantations ever. There was just one problem. None of the land in Hawaii was for sale. In traditional Hawaiian culture, the idea of owning land didn't exist. Plus, American paper money meant nothing to the native Hawaiians. And without some sort of ownership deal, the sugarcane the Americans grew could easily be harvested by pretty much anyone on the island. Not a great business plan. Luckily, that's where the missionaries' friendly little puppet king came in, the guy the missionaries had put in charge of all of Hawaii. He was easily convinced to create new land reforms that basically cut up Hawaiian land and put it under the direct control of the king. Now, if any Westerners wanted land, they could just buy it from the king. Simple. The only problem was, none of this made any sense to native Hawaiians who had been living on shared land for almost 1,000 years.
See, and so by not having the knowledge of owning the land because it's not their culture, and by having a puppet king, it's interesting to me. There's always the best way to kind of destroy a people is to get the people to participate that you're trying to destroy. So everything from like the Willie Lynch letters, you know, how to control the Negro slave, putting a puppet king in there, right? Who's going to do what's in the best interest of these few landowners or the people that desire to steal the land, right? The Christian missionary. The puppet king is going to have to take the orders from them. And so you see what I mean? The best way to do it is to get somebody who looks a wolf in sheep clothing, best way to put it.
And even if they wanted to buy land, they couldn't because they had no money. The only people with any of this real money the king wanted were the Americans. And so, the American farmers and missionaries arbitrarily created a monopoly on land that was never supposed to be sold in the first place. From there, it was nowhere but up for these humble missionaries and their patriotic farmer friends. They were planting sugarcane on every piece of land they could get their hands on. They were harvesting boatloads of sugarcane, ready to export to America. There was just one more issue: import levies. The taxes America charged for goods like sugar coming into the US from another country. Hawaii, after all, wasn't a part of America yet at this point, and that's where the real trouble for Hawaii started.
Google Fi, a phone plan by Google. Get unlimited data, calls, and texts with a Fi Unlimited plan, starting.
For decades before Hawaii became a sugar exporter, America had placed heavy tariffs, or taxes, on imported sugar. That's because the US had its own sugar monopoly to deal with. Basically, a small group of American sugar farm owners had gotten together and forced the American government to put massive taxes on any foreign sugar coming into America. That way, the local farmers could set their sugar prices as high as they liked, without any competition to drive them back down.
And if you remember over the last few years, you know, goods coming in from China and other places, remember like the tariffs, who ends up paying for that? The consumer. So that's why I think it's important to have the conversation, and I'll do a video about socialism and capitalism, because that's a way where it's really like that decision is not based on but a small group of people. The owners, the people who have the money to bring it in, and it's going to be brought in, the commodity is going to be brought in either way. So charging a whole lot of money is going to get all the cost gets passed down to consumer, while the people who are running the corporation or the business are generating all that wealth and income. One of the ways this also happened, maybe not through tariffs, but if you notice during the pandemic, a lot of the wealthy people there, they made like 35% profit. You know what I mean? Like the Bill Gates, the Elon Musks of the world, these people made billions. I mean, they were sending up rockets to space and stuff. You know what I mean? While not paying their people wages. Like, I swear, I shop at Amazon, so maybe I'm guilty. I don't know if you do too, but I swear it is amazing to me that Amazon, it's legal to do what Amazon is doing. I swear they're breaking like so many labor laws. I'm going to do a video about that too. I got so many videos to do, but like, if you don't know about Amazon, you should definitely look into it as far as the working conditions. But since Jeff Bezos owns the newspaper, right? Which one does he own? The Washington Post. Since he owns the Washington Post, he's able to control the narrative. And because he's so wealthy, he can bury a story. So he tried to bury the stories about people dying in the warehouses and stuff. And then, you know, so it came out, then he buried it. But then it come to find out, like, yes, Amazon had to corroborate all of the stories and say, yes, they are true. So the people who own the money, essentially, right? The people who own the corporation, the people who own the business generating the money, the people who own the media, if you have that, then you have a monopoly and you can bend anyone's will. So in the old day, they didn't have that. So during this time, these few people got together and they were the ones making the decisions. And so it was about your cohort then. And I feel like it's still like that today, whereas a few people are making the decisions that everyone else has to live under. Like a living wage is too much to ask. I don't understand that. 40 hours of work, 40-hour work week, and a person cannot afford a 2-bedroom apartment in their zip code. That doesn't make sense to me.
It was a cookie-cutter monopoly and a massive problem for American farmers in Hawaii. These giant...
And I would be called a socialist for saying that, right? I would be called a socialist for saying if you work a full-time job, you should be able to afford a living. And you should earn a living wage. Because otherwise, if you cannot, then that business shouldn't be a business. And that person shouldn't have an employee if they can't pay them a living wage. Otherwise, that's what? Slavery.
Import tariffs were cutting into their profits. Something had to be done. So in 1854, under pressure from the American farmers, the puppet king of Hawaii made America an offer it couldn't refuse. Reduce tariffs on Hawaiian sugar to 0, and we'll give you exclusive rights to opening commercial and military bases on our islands. To be clear, no native Hawaiians wanted any of this. They didn't want to exchange their land so the American farmers could get rich. And they were worried that exchanging a few pieces of land for 0 tariffs will lead to all of Hawaii falling under American control someday. But in 1876, the agreement became official. Import taxes on Hawaiian sugar went to 0, and Americans could build on the islands of Hawaii. America had its foot in the door. The number of Hawaiian sugar farms tripled, and the American farmers were making bank. But didn't end there. You see, the agreement was supposed to last for 8 years, after which it could be renewed. But when the 8th year came around, America decided it didn't really like the terms of this already great deal. Exclusive land rights didn't seem like enough in exchange for 0 tariffs. On top of that, mainland American sugar farmers were not happy. They now had all this competition from Hawaiian sugar. They had lost their monopoly, and they politely voiced their concerns to the American government. So, just like a landlord who takes every chance to increase rent, America decided to strong-arm for more. This time, America wanted all those exclusive land rights, plus control of Pearl Harbor. By now, Pearl Harbor had become one of the most important strategic points in the Pacific Ocean, and America wanted it for itself. Unsurprisingly, the king agreed. After all, giving in to the Americans wasn't just an option anymore, it was an obligation. Drunk on power, the American farmers quickly saw their chance to force the Hawaiian king to hand over even more control of his country. So in 1887, a new Hawaiian constitution was introduced. Except this time, it was written by American lawyers and farmers. And the king? He was forced to sign it at gunpoint. What was the biggest change in this new constitution? Only landowners could be allowed to vote or run for office. It didn't.
Have you noticed the common theme? Only certain people get to vote, and using what the other people have, right? In this case, land. It was not part of the indigenous culture or Hawaiian culture to own land. It was not part of their idea of the way of life. It was shared land, which is probably why they didn't need a government, right? Because they shared. So you see how, like, there's a common theme where certain people are given certain rights and other people are not, based on whatever. And it's always seems to be connected to voting, right? Remember the women's suffrage movement. Women couldn't vote. Black people couldn't vote. You're not a citizen. You're the 3/5 clause. Over and over again, the voting, like who is in versus who is out. That seems to be a pattern.
It didn't matter that most native Hawaiians still didn't own land. It also didn't matter that most landowners were white Americans. Under the new constitution, Native Hawaiians lost any say they had in the destiny of their country. The king had signed away his people's rights and independence. By now, Hawaii was practically a de facto US territory. Only a miracle could save Hawaii now. And that miracle came in the form of Queen Liliuokalani. In 1891, the king of Hawaii died, and his sister, Princess Liliuokalani, became queen. Unlike her brother, Queen Liliuokalani wasn't okay with American farmers running the country, and she spent the next 2 years trying to give Hawaii its independence back. Around the same time, the American sugar farmers ran into another problem, the McKinley Act. Basically, this act removed the tariffs on all sugar imports to America. Now sugar farmers from Jamaica to Nicaragua could ship their sugar to America without any hefty fees. The huge advantage Hawaiian sugar farmers once had was now gone. To keep local American sugar growers happy, the government agreed to pay farmers an extra 2 cents per pound for locally grown sugar. But the Hawaiian sugar farmers...
So the way I look at all of this, my mind is like, so many ideas come through, right? And it's like a brainstorm. You have your center bubble, right? The idea of owning land. And then if you don't own land, then you can't vote. So essentially you have no say in the land that you were born in, no say in your kingdom. And your king really has no power because he was put there by European colonialist missionaries. So that seems a lot to me like American. I mean, this is American history, right? This is American history. This is how Hawaii became a state. And it's interesting that the goalpost is always moved when the system is no longer economically satisfying to the white dominant culture. That's been in American history, right? Since Christopher Columbus and, all that stuff, since European colonialism. When it's no longer profitable, that's when the goalpost is moved. That's when the game is changed to something else. Y'all see what I'm saying? Let me know what you think in the comments.
They were back at square one, and this time, no treaty or agreement could save them. The only way they could maintain their edge and keep their coffers full was to officially become a part of America. That way, they could also get that juicy 2-cent subsidy per pound of sugar. Now, imagine the horror.
So it feels like, okay, that's the point I was trying to make. It feels like, in a way, this is a type of reparations to the European colonialist missionaries who came and stole the land from Hawaii and utilized the U.S. government to do it. Because I think I'm relating it to kind of like slavery, in the sense that slave owners got reparations, y'all. I don't know if you knew that. But yes, per slave, they got reparations. This is a historical fact, and you can look it up. Reparations were promised to the so-called Negro in America, and it was signed, but never. It was signed. I forget who signed it. It's getting a little late, but yeah, it was promised, but it wasn't delivered upon. And so clearly, it is funny too, because in today's culture, people might say, "Oh, nobody deserves a handout," or they make it seem like inflation is high because the government gave stimulus. I disagree. It's not high because the government gave American citizens stimulus. It's high because, number one, they want it to be high, and number two, because the American government bailed out huge industries like the airline industry, so forth and so on, during the pandemic, and gave the churches the PPP money, and a bunch of wealthy people got that money. So I think that's why inflation is high. And most of all, it's high because they want it to be high. And because they tell you these things on the news too, talking about how Americans had a lot more in savings and people were spending a lot less because they weren't having faith in the economy. And we were in a global pandemic. So that kind of makes sense on why people are spending less. But if they're not spending, this is a way to balance out and get people to start spending, or cause everyone to go into a recession, and then your money, is going to be worth a lot less. But without a doubt, one thing we know for sure, if you didn't know, every year your money is going to be 2 to 2.5% less, based on the inflation rate from the Federal Reserve. They have mandated that inflation is going to be 2 to 2.5%. It probably is 2.5% a year. So every year your money is worth 2.5% less.
These farmers experienced when, in the middle of planning to become an official American territory, Queen Liliuokalani comes out of nowhere and announces her plans for a new constitution. A constitution that will give Native Hawaiians back all their power. If this new constitution is put into place, the Americans would be screwed. And for them, the solution became obvious. It was time to overthrow the Hawaiian kingdom once and for all.
Let's be honest, a lot of sane
The plan to overthrow Hawaii's government had been in the works for years, but when the Queen announced her plan for a new constitution, the Americans knew they would have to act fast. Enter John L. Stevens, Loren Thurston, and Henry E. Cooper, the American minister to Hawaii, an ex-Hawaiian government official, and an American lawyer. The three main conspirators. They called themselves the Committee for Safety, a very inconspicuous name. And together, they planned to overthrow the Hawaiian Queen and officially put Hawaii under American control. January 14th, 1893, Queen Liliuokalani announces her plans for a new constitution, and the Committee for Safety immediately jumps into action. With most of the government consisting of Hawaiian-born Americans, the coup would be relatively easy. The only real problem would be the Queen and her guards. Would they put up a fight? And if they did, would other Native Hawaiians join them? Luckily, an American warship was docked just a few miles ashore, and as the American minister to Hawaii, John Stevens had all the authority in the world to call the soldiers to shore. January 16th, 1893, the minister does exactly that, and 162 American Marines and sailors land on the island with guns drawn and artillery in tow. With this show of strength, three conspirators gather a crowd of American farmers outside the royal palace a day later, with nearly 60 armed American soldiers by their side. And not one person in the Queen's government could or wanted to help her. After decades of handing power over to America, there were no patriotic Hawaiians left in office. Defeat is inevitable. And to add insult to injury, Henry Cooper, the American lawyer that helped plan the coup, announced the Queen was officially removed from power without her ever having one word or say about it. That was it. That was the coup. No long drawn-out battle, no psychological warfare on the populace. The three conspirators had literally brought a couple of soldiers over, announced the Queen was no longer in power, and everyone kind of just accepted it. To replace the Queen, the Americans chose a guy named...
Does this make you think about, I don't know, it just made me think about guns, and how much guns have played a role in shaping history. Does this, and maybe, do you think that overemphasis on the Second Amendment and, wanting assault rifles and that kind of thing, I'm sorry. Do you think it's coming from this? Like, the nature of history and what has been, do you think that plays a role in how people view the Second Amendment? I know a lot of people say, oh, it's, to prevent a tyrannical government and, the right to bear arms, yada, yada. But do you all think that enough people truly know history and how things were taken over, so that's why they want to hold on to their guns? Let me know what you think in the comments.
Named Sanford Dole to be the new leader, and that was it. After decades of being told what to do by Americans, most Native Hawaiians weren't exactly surprised that it ended like this. With even the Queen's own government consisting of more Americans than Hawaiians, the kingdom's fate was sealed. It was pointless to fight back. Hawaii had been ever so slowly beaten into submission. The only thing the Queen could do was beg the American government for help. You see, the Committee of Safety didn't exactly have the explicit permission of the American president to carry out their coup. In fact, President Grover Cleveland never had any idea what was going on until it happened. The president was actually a good friend of the Queen's. He even offered the Queen her position back if she would agree not to prosecute the people responsible for.
Do you think that is a true fact? That the president didn't know what was going on? I wonder about that piece.
For the coup, but even that was just a formality. In reality, the new president of Hawaii, Sanford Dole, made it abundantly clear that that would never happen. The American government had been checkmated by its own citizens. In the end, the American government had no choice but to recognize the new Hawaiian government. The only thing President Cleveland could do to make things even a little better was refuse to accept Hawaii as an official state. So, for the next nearly 60 years, Hawaii existed only as an independent republic and a recognized American territory under the rule of American citizens. And the sugar farmers? They got what they wanted. As an American territory, Hawaiian sugar farms could enjoy all the benefits the other American farmers got.
Yet still today, like Hawaiians, native Hawaiians who have the 50% blood DNA, can't afford to live here or cannot get. I mean, you saw on the last video from AJ, that lady was in her 60s and still has not been able to get any land.
In 1959, after nearly 60 years of Hawaiian-born Americans campaigning to be part of the United States, Hawaii was finally made the official 50th state in 1959. None of the few native Hawaiians left on the islands celebrated. In fact, in 1993, more than 12,000 Hawaiians marched in protest, asking for the return of their land and their rights. In 2015, 95% of Hawaii's land was still owned by just 82 landholders. More than half of that belongs to a state and government the people didn't choose, and the rest, it's still in the hands of the sugar and pineapple companies. And if that's not enough, thousands of native Hawaiians have been waiting for more than 100 years to gain access to the 200,000 acres of land they were promised by the US Congress in 1920. This land was supposed to be given to anyone with at least 50% Hawaiian ancestry, but since the law passed, almost half of that land has actually gone to non-Hawaiians. That's the dark reality you'll never hear from tour guides in Hawaii. The people who have called Hawaii home for more than 1,000 years find themselves without land or independence, waiting for their share.
And, I have not looked up how much, just think about 200,000 acres of land that was promised in 1920. Think about the value of that.
Of 100,000 acres of land that's left for them, while American billionaires get to buy entire Hawaiian islands of the same size for their private use, and no one says a thing. Hawaii was America's first taste of overthrowing a foreign government, but it was far from its last. And every time the American government carried out a coup, a little bit of the world's history would be altered. Countries would end up ruled by dictators, thousands of people would die, and irreparable damage would be done to the global balance of power. But not one coup would become quite as important or have as serious of consequences as the Iranian coup of 1953.
Yeah, so it's just very interesting to me. He goes on to talk about another documentary that he did. One of the things that happened recently, since I've been in Hawaii, when I got here, jet fuel had leaked into the drinking water. And so let's look at that. Let's look at a Vice clip from that. Yeah, it's just very crazy to me, man, that like people from Hawaii cannot afford to live in Hawaii and cannot afford to buy a home or build a home because they cannot afford to buy the land that was promised to them in 1920. Another pattern that seems like they only, and see, this is why, you know, people talk about having rights or, you know, marriage equality or gay marriage, as they like to say, but I'm gonna say marriage equality is not about anything but the rights. If you're not married, try going to the hospital. And there's other pieces to that, right? Like family elements. Let's say you happen to be gay, or you know somebody who's gay, right? And there, we know in times past, in speaking about, you know, Christian missionaries or certain faiths do not accept gay people. So imagine your loved one, imagine, you don't even have to be gay. Imagine you not being able to go see your significant other in the hospital because you don't have a government document that says that you are that person's spouse, you're that person's husband, you're that person's wife. This is, you know, what marriage is about. Then there's taxes, right? You can file single, you can file married. There's a whole bunch of other things that are attached to marriage. It's not just about two men getting married or two women getting married. There's these other elements to marriage. I don't know how I got off on that.
You're gonna wear that fancy dress?
Yeah,
Okay, sure. You're gonna keep the shorts on under?
yeah, Mommy, I love you.
I love you. I just always pictured Indy in Hawaii, so I was excited to bring her here and show her the beaches and show her the places that like we loved and show her the aloha. But I wish I haven't. I wish we didn't come here.
Hawaii was supposed to be paradise for Ariana Wyatt. She moved here with her family in February of 2021, when her husband, a technical sergeant with the Air Force, was assigned to work at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. Their daughter, Indy, was 3. Within just a few months, they started getting sick.
So this is just from this year. This is your...
You know, for the record, not to put my business out there, but this is where I live. This is where I live, and I was not able to drink the water, and I didn't. And luckily, I found out about this before, you know, I drank the water and all of that. Like, so I got here during when the water crisis was already happening.
Your medication from
Mine
this
and
year?
my husband's. Wow.
Face rash, migraines,
Diarrhea.
Were you guys on medication before this?
No. This is all from just living here.
When did you notice health problems in your family?
And this is crazy too, right? So you heard earlier that basically for the U.S. to put military bases here, right? So it's kind of interesting to me that, you know, when you do things that are wrong, good can never come from them. I'll just leave it at there.
I think early on, our cat did not want to drink the water. So I should have known then that something was up. For myself, it started the end of May. I started having migraines pretty regularly. Migraines I can't even describe. And then I started having like really bad back pain and just diarrhea that would not stop. So I went to the ER and they found out that my kidney was swollen and they did not know why. And then for Indy, it's hard to talk about Indy. One of the first things was that she was having urinary issues, and we would call the doctors and they would say like, oh, just put her in the bathtub and put, you know, baking soda in there and let her sit. Around October, I started seeing like this decline in her to the point where she would be like, Mommy, my legs hurt. Like, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm tired. God, this eats me alive. Like, she was telling me this whole time. That she was not okay. And then the night before Thanksgiving, I had taken a shower and my entire back was just like inflamed and red. I had rash all over my face. It just felt like a horrible sunburn. It was almost like, oh my, this is it. The water, it's the water.
That same Thanksgiving week, almost 6,000 people reported getting sick. Many went to the hospital for diarrhea, vomiting, and chemical burns. Both service members and civilians, they all had one thing in
I think it was about like 5,000 people. It could have been more, but I think the number I remember reading was 5,000 people were sick.
common. They lived in current or former base housing in homes connected to the Navy's water system. Water many people were now saying smelled like gasoline.
Oh, it's gonna hurt. Crazy. This is concerning because not only with the smell, you actually feel it, a burning feeling and itching.
But the Navy dismissed everyone's fears. In an email on November 28th, a base commander said, "There are no immediate indications that the water is not safe. My staff and I are drinking the water on base." Families didn't buy it. They knew they lived close to Red Hill, an old Navy
Clearly he was lying, y'all.
fuel storage facility. They knew Red Hill's tanks were close to the wells that supplied their drinking water. And they knew Red Hill had a history of leaks. There had been a big one in 2014, another in May of 2021, and there had just been another one on November 20th. But the Navy kept saying the leak hadn't affected the water.
The tanks and the fuel are monitored on a daily basis to end, so there's no active leak. We have not lost fuel.
I have a 18-week high-risk pregnant wife, and I'm being told you can use the water, go away.
You have been saying that it's safe to bathe with, and we have been experiencing side effects. It is not safe.
The problem is there's houses where people bathe and there are no effects. So how do you shut down water for everybody?
You guys knew about it last week, and the military dismisses it. And we're the ones that have to live with the repercussions.
Almost 2 weeks after people got sick, a report from the Department of Health revealed there was fuel in the water, 350 times the acceptable level. The Navy had been serving bad water to 93,000 people.
The week of the water situation, I called her doctor and was just like, "Hey, she has a lump in her neck, and she's saying that her neck hurts." We got her in, and they told me at 3 years old that she had her thyroid was attacking itself, and that we needed to begin treatment immediately.
At 3 years old, y'all. Dang. And for those senior leaders to be sitting there and just tell a lie like that, just because there were other homes where people weren't affected. That was so dismissive, wasn't it? Could you imagine if that was you, and you were there on behalf of yourself or you and your children? Oh, because certain people are not affected. That seems very just unmilitary-like. That seems like un-American. But in America today, that's very American, unfortunately. Like when people talk about the political parties, oh, you're a Democrat, oh, you're a Republican. It's the Democrats' fault. It's the Republicans. Last I checked, Congress has way more power than the president, y'all. I'm gonna have to do a show on the presidency. And over the last few years, how Congress has given up a lot of power to the executive branch. However, they are the constant. So whatever is being done or whatever's not being done, the blame goes to Congress. Just saying.
Drink some water, okay? So make sure you wash it down. Good job.
When you heard officially there is something wrong with the water, how did it make you look back on the past few months?
Like, I just think of every single time that I had put Indy in that bathtub with that water and made her sit there when she didn't want to. And that every single time they told me, like, just push fluids with her. And that I was unknowingly making it worse.
What could the long-term risks be?
Her endocrinologist says that in this type of situation with exposure, it could be cancer. For them to say, like, it's short-term exposure, it's only happened in November, is a complete lie. It's a complete lie.
Your sense is that it's been going on for much longer?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've been poisoned much longer than just November and much longer than just this year. I mean, they've had multiple spills. I know they had a really big one in 2014. So this has been happening for a long time.
Travel pillows? We've been wearing them the wrong
2014 and still didn't do anything. I think that's the biggest piece, like with all of the money. And so imagine, it kind of, this is the military's Flint, Michigan. It's weird because maybe they didn't want to shut down the fuel tanks or empty them because of the money, right? Old World War II fuel tanks. But how much money do you think they had to pay for medications, right? Also for families to stay in hotels because they couldn't stay in their homes and they couldn't drink the water. They couldn't cook. So how much money, you know what I mean? Like, it would have been cheaper just to fix the fuel tanks from the beginning.
As the 1940s began, the world was in turmoil.
Red Hill was built during World War II to protect the U.S. military's fuel supply from aerial attacks. It's the military's largest fuel storage facility in the world.
A completed tank was 250 feet, top to bottom, and 100 feet in diameter, big enough to hold a 20-story building. The tanks can hold 6 million barrels of oil.
Red Hill's tanks are just 100 feet above Oahu's main drinking source, an aquifer that serves 500,000 people across the island. From when fuel first filled the tanks in 1943, the Navy has documented at least 77 leaks, or what it calls unscheduled fuel releases, totaling about 200,000 gallons. Vice News reviewed dozens of Navy documents, audits, risk assessments, and data spanning decades that show the Navy irregularly maintained and insufficiently inspected Red Hill and continuously downplayed the facility's risks to the EPA, Hawaii's Department of Health, and the public. Considering this history of negligence, the November incident was almost inevitable. In spite of Red Hill's known threat to the environment, the Navy has maintained it is critical to national security.
Red Hill is the last gas station between the mainland and any kind of points west. And so if we have to surge any kind of major military operations, we are the only thing in town to support those operations.
Locals have been calling to shut down Red Hill since 2014, when a massive spill contaminated the groundwater and soil. The drinking water wasn't tainted back then, but people did start to fear what all these fuel leaks could do to them and the environment.
This is a ticking time bomb. It is set up for catastrophic failure.
Ernie Lau manages Oahu's civilian water supply, serving 1 million customers. After the November spill, he closed 3 of the island's main wells so jet fuel couldn't get from the Navy system into the rest of the water supply.
How did you feel when you heard about the latest leak?
I said, my worst fears have come to pass. You know, we've been trying to sound the alarm on this situation for 8 years now. I won't have peace until this facility is emptied out and shut down. Below the tanks and nearby these tanks, the aquifer is contaminated with fuel.
The aquifer is already...
So 8 years, y'all. 8 years, wouldn't you say that's enough time to fix the problem?
Contaminated?
It is contaminated under the facility and nearby.
So this leak has affected way more people than the families that were on the water supply.
That is correct. The thing that is common between the Navy and the Board of Water Supply, we tap the same aquifer. It's hydraulically, physically connected to each other. So it's like a glass of water with 2 straws, but it's the same cup. And if fuel is contaminating one side of the water in that cup, it could migrate across the valley and be pumped out and sent into our water system to our customers. We cannot allow that to happen. They were actually having detections of fuel and fuel products in their drinking water source going back, looks like from about July.
So people have been potentially drinking contaminated water for months before they were notified.
We think that is a possibility looking at that data. That is a question that you need to pose, I think, to the Navy.
Has the Navy been honest with you?
I don't think they've been completely honest with me.
Notice.
You know, frankly, they don't tell us everything. And there's probably more information available than we are even aware of, but they're not willing to release that.
The Navy declined an interview request with Vice News and refused to answer any of our questions. In a statement, they said, "The health, safety, and well-being of our people, their families, and our community neighbors has been and will remain our priority."
And that's the crazy part, right? So this goes back, I don't know, like I told you before, my mind is like a brainstorm, but like all these issues run together, right? Everything, these are human issues, human problems where certain people, you know, care about certain people and then don't care about others. And so the Navy knew about all of this for a number of years. They knew about all the leaks. Then they weren't even being honest with the gentleman just said, you know, that he doesn't feel like they were being honest with him. And then for them to say the health, safety, and well-being of our people is the top concern, the main priority, then how were they not notified immediately and the fuel tanks drained immediately? I mean, the Pentagon had to come out here. I mean, it was a big show.
We have about 1,000 military contamination sites in Hawaii.
1,000?
Running while black is
very insane to me, y'all.
Its first base on Hawaii in 1907 and is now the state's second biggest industry after tourism. Professor Kyle Kajihiro's family has been on Oahu for 4 generations. He leads tours to show just how much power the military has over the island and the scars it's left behind.
Everything from unexploded ordnance, unexploded munitions, to these chemicals that, you know, are moving in the environment invisibly, but could be there for a long time. So yeah, so
that's Pearl Harbor down there?
Yeah. This was the center of the food basket of Oahu. Their vision of turning it into a military base just sort of overrode what was already here for 1,000 years, and now have turned Pu'uloa into a giant Superfund site. There's a constant occupation underway, even if it doesn't always look menacing, and the Red Hill disaster is only the most recent incident that helps to reveal, I guess, these problems that have been here for a long time.
This place looks like paradise. And then you hear about these problems.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. That's part of the problem, is that the image of paradise masks the violence that's going on. You'll see signs along the shoreline that say, don't eat the fish, don't go swimming, because it's toxic. And the military controls hundreds of thousands of acres of Hawaiian land. 68% of the military's land holdings in Hawaii come from the stolen lands of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And so it's not a problem of the past, it's a present problem of dispossession. Those are lands not available to Hawaiians to use for other purposes. So all of these sites add up to an environmental justice problem, an environmental racism problem that affects mainly working class Native Hawaiian and immigrant communities.
What are you most concerned about?
I'm worried about our islands becoming a toxic catastrophe. We can't continue to do this addiction to the military economy, which leads to disastrous outcomes like what we're seeing right now.
And I just, I think it is a new level when the people who are affected is the military. And yet, you know, the Navy was like, we don't really care who's being affected. So I think that's flipping of the script as far as the idea of those with rights and those who don't have rights. It's kind of weird to me how only when it became an issue after people were getting hurt, but you know they monitor the water source all the time. 350 times the amount. Is that not crazy, y'all? 350 times the normal amount that would be allowed in drinking water. That sounds really toxic to me.
Over the years, Red Hill employees have anonymously leaked documents to the press and lawmakers, suggesting the Navy downplayed leaks, hid information from regulators, and ignored its own consultants' recommendations on how to fix the facility. One of those whistleblowers was Victor Peters. After Red Hill's spill in 2014, he publicly shared documents showing the leak may have been almost 50% bigger than what the Navy said. When did you start at Red Hill?
1972. I crawled on my hands and knees and installed cable as a young man all the way through the tunnel.
Peters spent decades at Red Hill, working his way up to managing the facility and other military fuel farms in the Pacific until 2014. He specialized in leak detection and says he repeatedly tried to raise issues internally, but was dismissed. When did you start noticing problems?
The first time I walked into Red Hill.
So it was leaking decades ago.
Yes, 24/7.
The Navy says 180,000 gallons have leaked from Red Hill. What's your estimate?
It's going to add up in the millions.
So they're missing hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel being documented?
Well, I can just tell you what I observed, and now they may not consider that a leak because it's leaking on the floor, it's gone into a sump. I would imagine a majority of that did not go into the ground, but you know, so it's your definition of what you want to consider a leak.
Do you consider that a leak? As an expert?
Well, to me, it's supposed to be in the tank, not on the floor. So yeah, I did. I basically documented everything that had to do with leak detection that I was involved.
So he kind of just gave the answer right there to the question of, you know, so maybe they didn't consider it a leak because of whatever. But going into the water system, that's like next level. All these people talking about women and children, and you know what I mean? Like, wow.
This was the Red Hill Fuel Contingency Plan, August 2007. This is what the contractor wrote. He outlined everything in yellow that he had to take out. The government would not pay him unless he take all this out. See, everything related to leak detections.
So did you feel like that was undermining the goal to keep the drinking water safe?
So I'm just speculating, but if they followed the recommendation here, I think that both the 2007 Tank 48 leak.
So y'all, that's 2007. And this water leak happened in 2021.
And the 2014 leak would have been detected immediately.
If these recommendations had been left in the report?
Yes.
Does the Navy have leak problems in other facilities around the world that you're familiar with?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is it a widespread problem?
It's part of the business.
See, now this is gonna, I hope that the other places are being taken care of, because this should be a sign, right? Like, okay, invest, do what you need to do, spend the money, fix the pipes.
The military's toxic history spreads far beyond the Hawaiian Islands. A 2009 inspection revealed the Navy had been knowingly providing unsafe water to most of its overseas bases, some going back 20 years. and that, quote, despite the fact that deficiencies could result in potential health risks, they're often ignored. Even after this, it took the Navy 6 more years to start fixing the problems. In the US, the Department of Defense found chemical contaminations at 687 military sites. The most notorious case happened at a Marine Corps base in North Carolina called Camp Lejeune, where toxic solvents and fuel poisoned the drinking water for 3 decades.
Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, is quite possibly one of, if not the worst, water contamination incidents in modern world history.
I did not know about this. Did you know about Camp Lejeune? I did not know about this.
History.
This is her. Right there.
That's Cheney?
Yeah, she had lost her hair. She was under treatment then.
Jerry Ensminger was a Marine on the base in the 1970s. His 9-year-old daughter Janie died of leukemia in 1985 as a result of in utero exposure to the toxic water. From the 1950s to the 80s, about 1 million people were exposed at Camp Lejeune. Many later developed certain cancers at abnormally high rates. Hundreds of babies were born with birth defects. Many died. Ensminger has spent decades investigating how the military let this happen and fighting for compensation for victims.
The drinking water was contaminated for decades. The bad part about it was that the Department of the Navy and the Marine Corps knew it was there and did nothing about it.
So earlier in the video, remember I said like these things seem to be a pattern.
Why?
They've never answered that. You know the term playing ostrich? Put your head in the sand, hope it goes away.
How many military bases have these issues?
90% of them, if not more. The United States Department of Defense is our nation's largest polluter, without exception. Forget about Dow Chemical.
The journalist Abby Martin also brought this out, and she asked Nancy Pelosi at the, what was it called? The COP26 or whatever that was called about pollution. She asked Nancy Pelosi that question about, you know, the military and, you know, because they talk like they care. The politicians do like they care about pollution and all this stuff. But she was like, hey, the military is the biggest, you know, pollutant force. Like, what are we doing about that? And of course, Nancy Pelosi didn't have an answer.
Forget about ExxonMobil. Forget about DuPont. The United States Department of Defense has more Superfund sites than any other entity in our nation. Period.
Can anyone provide a real check and balance to what's happening?
Efforts like ours on the Camp Lejeune issue, we're trying to, but I mean, look at what just happened in Hawaii. Evidently, the Department of the Navy didn't learn a damn thing. They knew they had fuel leaks for decades in Hawaii. They knew it.
How did you feel when you heard about what had happened?
And I said, here we go again. They've abused the environment for over a century with chemicals.
And so if you, that Navy officer that they were talking to, he said, you know, they're the last fuel stop in 2015. If y'all remember that clip they showed earlier. Now, the interesting thing is like, okay, if it's that important, then why would you not fix the leak then? And or empty out the tanks and develop something else to hold the fuel in where it's not going to pollute the entire island. Because potentially, I mean, he shut it down because it potentially could have affected the entire island's drinking water. So why not do, if it's that important, why not do something to fix it? But it just goes to show that some, I mean, once again, the patterns, veterans are not compensated when these things happen. You know what I'm saying? Like, look at Tuskegee. airman experiment, like how was that able to happen? Or Agent Orange, how was that able to happen? For so long, people had to fight to receive compensation for what, you know, they raised their right hand to serve this nation.
And then they try to hide it.
What lies ahead for those families?
They need to be proactive in their health, because they could, you know, end up like a lot of people at Camp Lejeune. The burden is on the victim. I'll probably be fighting this till I die.
Ensminger's work led the government to acknowledge the link between the toxic exposure on base and a long list of cancers and illnesses. The VA now has to give benefits to Lejeune families, but he's still fighting for service members to be able to sue DoD for damages from their time on base. After months of pressure from the public and Congress members, on March 7th, the Pentagon officially ordered the Navy to shut down Red Hill.
Secretary Austin decided today to take all steps necessary to defuel and to permanently close the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility.
On March 18th, the state and Navy finished flushing and testing the contaminated areas and declared the water was safe again in all homes. Since then, over 100 people say they've experienced symptoms like headaches, dizziness, and rashes. As for the island, closing Red Hill isn't the end. The closing of civilian wells has already caused water shortages. What's the future hold for Oahu and for Hawaii?
It's going to be challenging, and it'll probably be challenging over a number of years. The Navy would try to portray, and I've seen this pattern of behavior before. They poured a lot of money into the response to this incident, and it's all good. They've taken care of all the problems. Everything can go back to normal. That's not true. That's exactly what the DoD wants us to do, to kind of forget it and to let it just...
Yeah. Told you it's a pattern. But I wonder, you know, like, emptying the fuel tanks isn't the end either, because, like, what about all of the cost, you know, that, so for the water shortages and stuff, like, what's the end state of that?
Fade in memories.
The Pentagon said it could be a year before the fuel is out of the tanks, one of which leaked again in April. And it'll be even longer before those who drank fuel know exactly what it did to them. Research has shown that people exposed to total petroleum hydrocarbons, or TPH, the chemicals in jet fuel, have an increased risk of neurological problems, infectious disease, cancer, and autoimmune disorders.
Here's my bathroom. It's all pink. It's got a rainbow thing to dry your face. I got a water spat.
Yeah, we don't use that water, huh?
No.
We use the...
I got a butterfly in it.
You do? That's right. Do you know what that's called?
Yeah.
What is
the
that?
thyroid.
Your thyroid. Very good.
I drank some bad water.
Oh.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. You're okay.
And
You
then
can be
it's like a little red.
Ariana and Indy Wyatt are now part of a class action lawsuit against base housing and have filed personal injury claims against the Navy. The family applied for reassignment given Indy's condition and were approved. They'll leave the island this summer.
Every 3 weeks, we have to get her blood done. And I just think of like having to hold her down while she's like begging me to like leave, or like, mommy, please make them stop. Like, I feel like I've betrayed her.
Does she know what's happening?
She's like, I won't drink that water anymore. I remember when it rained for the first time. We used to just come out like jump in muddy puddles with her rain boots on. And I remember looking outside and there was like a rainbow sheen just on the ground. And just having to tell her, like, we can't do that no more. And her understanding, like, that it's bad, that
this is just, you can't play in the water. You can't play in the rain anymore. I think she feels like she's being punished. And I don't know how to have that conversation to make her understand that it was never you. There was none of this is you.
Just tell her. That's some heavy stuff, y'all. That is some heavy stuff. And, you know, if you ever served in the military, then there are some stereotypes, right? And it's kind of like, I can imagine, you know, you feel like you're doing something to serve the country and be responsible, but then to be put in a situation because like senior officers, senior commanders, senior enlisted leaders, senior people, you know, put you in this position. Like, you know, I can imagine how hard it is to serve and then like to try to explain that to your child. And I could see how she feels that she betrayed her child because she's supposed to be protecting her child. Like that's like the stereotype, you know, from the military. And let's show one more short video about the activists fighting against U.S. occupation.
This is the Hawaii most visitors never see. An hour from the luxury hotels and shops in the farthest corner away from Honolulu. It's the Hawaiians' Hawaii, working class and proudly native, where locals will tell you Hawaii is occupied by the U.S., that it has been for 124 years, and that it'll one day be free. We came here to see the native sovereignty movement in action. We are driving through Waimanalo, which is a stronghold of the sovereignty movement here in Hawaii. And we're headed to a village in the hills that was established by a sovereignty group called the Nation of Hawaii. The village is called Refuge of Waimanalo, with a population of roughly 80. The state handed the group 45 acres of land in the 90s after it occupied a popular beach for over a year. Bumpy Kanahele is the group's leader and head of the village. Do you have your own passport here in the Nation of Hawaii?
We have things ready to print out for the passports.
Can I apply for one? They are banning Muslims in the U.S.
We're taking in citizenship applications now, so any of you disgruntled Americans want to come on by, come to Hawaii, come visit us in Oahu, and we'll be more than happy to accommodate. You got to learn about us, though, our history.
And for Native Hawaiians, it's a painful history. In 1893, armed U.S. naval forces helped American sugar plantation owners overthrow Hawaii's queen. The provisional government that was set up after ceded Hawaii's sovereignty to the U.S. Then it embarked on a campaign to squash Native culture. What's one word you would use to describe what happened here in 1893?
Genocide. That was their intent, to make life hard for us in such a way it would cause our own destruction. And that's what happened. It's still happening. It's more passive. It's like genocide in paradise.
It's made official at the White House. President Eisenhower congratulates the new congressional representatives of Hawaii, adding the 50th and southernmost state.
Hawaii officially became America's 50th state in 1959. In 1993, the U.S. formally apologized for its involvement in the illegal overthrow of the sovereign Hawaiian kingdom, 100 years after the fact. That's where the story of how Bumpy wrangled these lush foothills begins. In that apology resolution, the U.S. admitted that Native Hawaiians had never relinquished their sovereignty. Armed with that fact, Bumpy and 300 others occupied Makapu'u Beach. They set up tents and blocked the area for 15 months. Hawaii's governor asked Bumpy to end the occupation in exchange for a 55-year lease on this land. Part of the agreement was that if and when a sovereign Hawaiian nation is established, this land would become part of it.
If and when, and a 55-year lease. Like, why does it take so long for justice? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Like I know, once again, I know I'll be jumping all around. Like, why is Matt Gaetz not in jail? Why does justice take so long for people who are supposed to be, in higher levels of responsibility who commit crimes? Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. Everyone in the military took an oath. If you violate that oath, you should be dealt with in the army. It's the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I forget. I don't know if I think it's the same for the other services. I just don't know. But it's like you should be dealt with. If you're a police officer and you violate the law, then you should be charged maybe a little bit harsher than someone else who's just a U.S. citizen who doesn't, know the law and didn't take an oath to uphold the law.
Along with the renewed fight for independence came a cultural shift throughout Hawaii. Native Hawaiians began reclaiming traditions that were once actively suppressed. That meant teaching youth language and dance, getting traditional tattoos using ancient techniques, and fostering traditional farming and food making. But in reality, not much has changed. Everyone we talked to during our week there repeatedly stressed that Hawaii continues to be occupied illegally.
Military complex gave us our complex. PTSD, post-traumatic syndrome. 124 years have gone, but we are still here, standing strong.
At a gathering of musicians and activists in Honolulu, the inherited pain was palpable.
Y'all come from very deep hurt. A crime has been committed, still being committed.
That is part of our struggle to maintain rights, but more importantly, what are those rights rooted in? And those rights are rooted in a country that had its sovereignty and recognition stolen by the United States. Businessmen, sugar barons, they wanted to soak up the land.
Bumpy sees his village as a model for self-determination, but for now, it's still partially on the grid. The village runs off 200 amp boxes with houses sharing power.
Nobody can have a hot stove going, like one of those hot plates, or like a blow dryer. They gotta watch all of that. It's everybody's in the same house.
Because you guys are off the grid.
Yeah.
So what does it mean for running water?
We're currently working on getting water from the mountains.
Brandon is Bumpy's nephew and one of the village leaders.
We're not politicians. We're not lawyers. We're not these highly schooled individuals. We're just Hawaiians exercising our rights over here.
20-year-old Filippo was born and raised here.
Yeah, going to school, I had to leave here. Had to go to school, had to get an education because that's the required law.
Mm-hmm.
I could have been homeschooled, but I'd rather go out, make friends.
When people ask you, where do you live, what do you say?
People ask me where I live, I tell them I live in Puanua, Waimanalo, or we just call it Sovereignty.
You call this place Sovereignty?
Yeah.
For some Native Hawaiians on the outside, sovereignty movements like Bumpy's are beyond symbolic. They have a real impact.
Overall, you need those type of people. If we don't shake up things, Hawaiian language would have never been approved to be taught as a foreign language. We wouldn't have Native Hawaiian agencies to provide us with better health and wellness and nutrition education.
See, it's always good to end on a good note, right? Like, it is good that they were able to accomplish some things and able to get the government to give them this land, but guess what? They sort of earned it. They occupied for 15 months, and then the governor made a deal with them. It wasn't like, hey, can you do this for us? You see what I'm saying? That's why I wondered, why is justice always so slow for the people who are in positions? Maybe because in those positions they have the power to slow down justice when it comes to covering up their own crimes.
So we fought for a lot to receive a lot.
What's your message to Americans in the United States who might not know much about Hawaii's history or what you're doing here?
I don't know if I want to talk to the people of America. They like battling with each other right now, right? And so all I can say is we've been there. We've been there, America, and we still have a lot to settle with the United States. It's not done.
Hey guys, it's Dina. Be sure to check out the last video.
So I hope that, during this time, we got to learn a little bit more about Hawaii and you know, like what's going on here and why people can't afford to live here. Homelessness is a problem, just like I'm sure in your city, homelessness is a problem. But the saddest piece about it, even though I wanted to end on a good note, this is a good thing that has happened. I think the saddest piece about it is not enough is being done. And where we are economically, like things are getting worse for everyone. Life should be better for every American. How are billionaires? How do we have more billionaires now than we've ever had before? How was the economy booming during the pandemic? Just because companies were doing stock buybacks and all that. And I'm going to do some videos on money and how money works, because I think we're definitely not taught that in school. And maybe some college level educated people don't even know like how money truly works. I'm halfway to a bachelor's, so you know. But my point is, like, the way that money is used as a tool, it seems like there's a constant moving of the goalposts. Like this time, we're so globally interconnected that if 2008 was to happen within the next year, and they're already saying that a recession is going to hit within the next year, that means it hit 2 years ago. You know what I mean? Or it hit during the last presidency, and it took this long to really feel the effects of it. You know, and we're just coming out of a pandemic. The saddest part is not enough is being done. And if 2008 happens now, we're more globally interconnected now. So just as in Hawaii, if you don't put money towards the people and investing in the people, then how are we going to have a working class? Why should I be able to own a business if I can't pay a living wage? Just so I can have a business, if I can't pay a living wage, I shouldn't own a business. If corporations aren't going to pay a living wage, they shouldn't own a business. It should not take this long, right? The promise was 1920 for the 200,000 acres. It's 2022. We saw a woman's testimony, a Hawaiian lady. She's in her 60s. She cannot pass that on to her children because they're not fully blooded Hawaiian, and probably because she's not going to see it during her lifetime. So like the fight for, to get these things done. And so this is the reason and the reality behind fighting for rights. And anytime any right is stripped away from any person, understand that they might come for your rights. I think that's a good note to end on. And I will catch y'all on the next stream. If you ever want to come on the show and have a conversation with me on the live, on the camera, let me know. Also, if you don't want to show your face, you don't have to show your face. It could just be audio. If there's any type of shows that you would like for me to do, hit me in the comments on what you would like me to do a show for. Check my website out at ibelievetemple.com. That's where you'll find I post all of the live streams I do there. I also have a prophetic blog there where I posted about a lot of the things that are happening now. So thanks for your support. Thank you for rocking with me. Thank you for watching the show. Thank you for your support. And I will see you in the next stream. Godspeed.